Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Naomi Papoushado, Director of Product Content Strategy and Management and UX Writer of Gongs.io. Welcome, Naomi, to Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Fantastic, Naomi. So I might have just introduced a little bit about yourself, but please add more to what you do and how did you originally or initially got into documentation, please?
No problem. I kind of fell into the profession. I relocated from England to Israel, and I didn't really know what I was going to do as my career. And then I was working at the Jerusalem Post, and somebody mentioned to me technical writing. I took a course and I got a placement, and I've never really looked back. Looking back, it's been a good career choice because it really plays to my strengths.
Fantastic, Naomi. So how long has it been? How many years have you been into documentation?
I've passed 20 years, just about.
Oh, fantastic. So it's 20 years of story. Great.
Yep.
So what kind of career options are out there for technical writers then, Naomi?
Here in Israel, there are a lot of career options for writers of all kinds because high-tech is one of our first industries here in Israel, and we have very diverse range of high-tech companies, everything from small startups to larger corporate organizations. And everybody needs writers to help get the product knowledge across to users, and it can take various forms, whether it's the documentation, emails, UX writing, and so on. So there's a lot of career opportunities over here and a lot of great minds that go into it.
Great. So at Gong, what is your documentation process and who do you normally involve in it?
It's a great question. In Gong, we sit on the product team, which is strategically great for being at the source of all the new features and so on. I'm the only one on my team. I'm kind of jack of all trades when it comes to anything product writing. And the process is quite involved with the UX team as well. So product managers and UX kind of start working on the features a little bit before I arrive. Then they'll call me in to be a part of deciding the direction of the feature in terms of what the text will look like and so on. And then after that, when the feature is released, I'll already have a lot of knowledge about the feature and be able to write it up into the help center, which is online.
Great. So how big is your team in Gong?
It's just me doing this job. I think I'll probably need to hire someone soon, but right now it's only me doing everything.
So just again about Gong and documentation. So how does Gong think about UX in their documentation?
UX is very important. We have more or less a team that is supporting currently 2 product managers to 1.5 UX people, and we need more. It's a very integrated process. Everyone is all hands-on. We have daily meetings with the dev teams as well. So everybody is always in the know about what's going on, where the feature is, what it needs, what areas need to be looked at and done. So the UX part is important to the product managers, and it's important for them that everybody has a say, the UX team and their UI designers, and also me from a writing perspective.
Wow, great. So other than considering about UX, what are the other important factors to consider when creating software documentation?
I think that the single most important factor is knowing your audience. I remember when I started out my career almost 20 years ago that we never really discussed who was reading the documentation. It was pretty much creating a PDF and then not really having any contact with who was reading it or how useful it was. We had a lot of screen captures and so on. Today, especially in Gong, which is a relatively new startup company, everything's online. I hardly use any screen captures. I can update all the time the documentation, but the most important thing is knowing that my audience is getting the information that they need. And over the last few years, I've introduced quite a lot of interviews with the customers and people who are partnering with us so that I can get an insight into what their job is and what they need out of our product so that I can help them when I'm doing the writing.
Right. So I'm sure with so much of experience you have, how do you decide on the type of technical writing that you should work on, whether that be user documents or technical docs, any kind of docs? So how do you decide on the type of technical writing?
I think that the type of writing is partly expected based on the fact that we want to have something written up for the feature. We want to promote the feature. We want to make sure that people know about the feature. So it starts from the sort of release notes aspect and introducing it in more of a marketing kind of way. If it's a quite technical feature, we have some configuration settings that can become really quite technical and complicated if it's with a certain integration, for example. So we need to make sure that we have not only very clear how-to articles, but we also have FAQ in case something goes wrong or in case people have a certain configuration that they need to take into account how they're going to set it up. So yeah, there's a lot of aspects that are going in there to determine what kind of writing we do. Recently, for example, I did a survey and I asked my team, why do we create so many FAQs? I can see in the Help Center analytics that people are not reading these FAQs. And there was no right or wrong answer. It was just really interesting to see that some people kind of got used to leaning on FAQs, and that was the way that they were introducing their features. And we were able to sort of take a fresh look at how we're going to present the questions. Are all questions frequently asked, or are some of them just nice to know? And reconsider how we're going to present them, whether it's in the UI itself or just in the Help Center and so on.
Nice. So, I mean, it need not be with Gong, but generally with all your 20 years of writing experience, what kind of reduction in workload have you seen? I mean, could be two ways to this question. Have you seen any reduction in workload? And if so, what kind of reduction in workload have you seen by introducing such quality documentation?
I have to say I've not seen any reduction. If anything, I've seen an increase because everybody likes to have good documentation. And I think one of the very early lessons in this career is that nothing is ever perfect or finished. You never finish and present and then go home. Everything is always up for tweaks or massage or slightly new addition to the feature, need to rework the content a little bit. I mean, for example, I'm in my Help Center 2-3 times every week just to update things that are stable, but we had a slightly new feature, a new twist on the feature going out. So it's like a living and breathing document. It's never done. So I wouldn't say that the workload's reduced at all. I think that because we're able to update and publish whenever we want, we can, and so we do. I think that's a sign of the times rather than because of having quality documentation. I think quality is expected. It's 2020. Most of our audience knows how to use computers, but they're expecting answers that are timely, and they're not going to wait for a month to get the information.
True. So in terms of support calls and technical queries or technical support enquiries, have you seen any reductions there by such documentations?
From my side, I saw that there were less searches that led to tickets being open, but I had a conversation with my support guys a week or so ago where they're saying that they've had quite a significant upsurge in tickets. I think it's probably related to the fact that we've had a lot more clients join over the period that they were discussing. I think it's good to keep monitoring that and to push self-service as much as possible so that people, generally speaking, people don't want to wait to solve a problem. They want to be able to sort of come in, quickly get the answer and go and solve the problem themselves. So we've discussed various ways that we can strategize that a bit better, to push the help center a bit more, and it's an ongoing discussion and an ongoing process to try and improve that process.
True, especially during the initial days of people trying to settle in with the software, right? Yeah. And you have mentioned this a few times already, the documentation at Gong is a public-facing one, correct?
No. It's behind a gate. You have to be a customer to be able to access the help center.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. So I think the next question I wanted to ask you might not be relevant to you. I wanted to know if you're generating any organic search traffic from your knowledge base.
So no. If you search anything on Gong, you'll get to the website, but you won't be able to access the help.
Oh, got you. All right. So what direction do you see the future of technical writing going down?
Very interesting question. I think that it's come a long way. I think it's a mix of mediums now. I think that our audiences have matured. 20 years ago, not everybody was familiar with computers and how to use them, and we had to be a lot more heavy-handed with describing every single step along the way. I've found myself now able to cut out certain flows if it's more or less obvious in the UI. It means the UI has been designed very well. I think a general rule of thumb anyway is if it's difficult to write up, it wasn't designed very well, because it shouldn't be so difficult to write. I think that there are lots of new mediums such as video and so on. I know from my kids' generation that they'd much rather watch a video. Personally, I'm of the generation where I'd much rather scan a page. So I think there's new directions there, there's new possibilities there, but I don't think there'll be a complete overhaul, at least not at this stage. I think people like short, digestible chunks of information. And again, it depends on what their goal is for the documentation. If they're learning more, if they're learning how to be better at their job, or if they have an issue and they're looking for a troubleshooting article. So there's definitely a range there. I think also in-app notices, such as the kinds that Walk Me do, like pop-up saying what's new. People love that. That's all content too. That's all coming out of our teams.
Mm-hmm. Super. So before we move on to the rapid fire round, anything I missed to ask you in the general Q&A session?
I don't know. I think one thing I would like to address, that I listened to a couple of your podcast episodes where there doesn't seem to be a good answer from people about how to measure the documentation. I actually find documentation very easy to measure. My issue is more how to measure the success of UX writing. But now for documentation, I am always on the analytics. I can access Sisense, I can access Zendesk and Google Analytics, and I can process that information to get quality KPIs and to monitor the lay of the land, what's going on in my help. And it's really important to keep on top of that.
All right, super. So you mentioned Sysens as well. So if you remember, we have a series with Gideon from Sysens. Yeah, super. Great. So let's move on to this rapid fire round. Who have you learned the most from in your career? So I think I'm taking you back 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think there's one source of documentation information that I've learned the most from. I think because the game has changed so much over the last 20 years, I can look back across my career and I can think of the bosses that pushed me to my limits, and the bosses who they had processes in place that were so good that you could really just learn from being part of that process. In addition, I think there's no end of resources, podcasts like this one, professional groups on LinkedIn, Medium articles. So there's always places to learn from, and I think it's good to listen to yourself and where it touches you, and from that you can learn a lot.
Great. So it looks like you read a lot and listen a lot to a lot of resources. So can you point us to a documentation related resource you have consumed recently so people can make use of that same resource?
Sure. I think Medium is my favorite for digestible and interesting articles about our area of work. I think there's probably a little bit more in the direction of UX writing. I'm always have the UX Collective open. There's always good articles on there, even, on the level of how to write a good error message. And so that's what I would recommend anyone do, is go into Medium and start searching, and the topics will come up.
Great. So what is that one piece of advice you would give to your old 20-year-old self?
Well, it's a really good question. I think at 20, I hope nobody has firm career plans and will want to stick to the same career. I think that's the age where you really get to experiment, and all through your 20s, you can just do whatever you want, which will lead you on to finding out who you are and what you're passionate about, and then becoming more in depth into whatever your career path ends up to be. But in terms of the special sauce that I feel I bring to my job today, it's really tapping into my inner personality and bringing that out in the documentation and the way that I write. Using a sense of humor.
Super. So that was great hearing to your story, Naomi. So I think we are almost there with our podcast. So any last tips and suggestions or thoughts that you would like to share to our audience today?
Nothing in particular. I think I've covered most aspects. I think stay awake, ask yourself questions all the time to check in on what you're doing, and sort of don't sleepwalk through anything. And good luck to everyone who's trying out, and find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Fantastic. So that's great. So super, Naomi. I really enjoyed this 15 to 20 minutes of session with you, and your experience is very nice to hear. So once again, I appreciate the time you spent with us today, and you look after yourself and enjoy the sun.
Likewise, Gary. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.